So last but certainly not least, we have Beth Card. Beth is a senior policy advisor for the Boston-based firm Smith, Costello & Crawford. She's an advocate for her clients and uses her regulatory experience to help them achieve their goals. She recently concluded her role as the Commonwealth of Massachusetts Secretary of the Executive Office of Energy and Environmental Affairs. Key focuses of her work was to develop an approach to invest in environmental infrastructure under the American Rescue Plan Act and implementation of the administration's comprehensive climate change law. She has more than 25 years of service in state agencies and quasi-governmental organizations. Beth served as Director of Environmental and Regulatory Affairs for the Massachusetts Water Resource Authority. And before joining the MWRA, Beth worked at the Mass Department of Environmental Protection for over 6 years as a Deputy Commissioner for Policy and Planning and Assistant Commissioner for the Bureau of Water Resources. Beth received a BA in Political Science from the University of New Hampshire and a JD from the Massachusetts School of Law. And without further ado, Beth Card. Thank you, Beth.
Thank you. Good afternoon. Thank you so much. It's wonderful to be here with all of you. The most important thing left off my bio was that I'm a Connecticut native, graduated from Windham High School a very long time ago, but it's nice to be here in my home state with all of you and to join you for these important conversations. One thing I wanted to just say right off the bat is how much I appreciate all the work that all of you in this room do. Public service is very difficult, and I know that from my many years working in state government. But public service is one thing. Working for water and wastewater utilities and supporting our communities and our residents 24 hours a day, 7 days a week is really a challenge, and you all don't get thanked enough. And so I wanted to lead my conversation with that acknowledgement and thanks to all of you for the work that you do. So there's a lot to focus on, a lot of opportunities and a lot of challenges that we're all facing right now. And part of what I wanted to focus on with all of you in my time today is how we manage communication and outreach when we all already have so much to do, so little time, so little money, so little staff, all the things that are challenges to all of you. And so we are focusing on the importance of infrastructure needs and why that's so important, the importance of constantly doing outreach and relaying to the community the challenges of the work that you have and the cost associated with it, but also why it's so important, how we hone our message and how we together can zero in on New England priorities. I'm working very closely with the National Association of Clean Water agencies as a partner of mine, and I've been working recently with them on looking at how we in New England can continue to have a stronger and more effective voice in Washington and to help bring those things home. You know, it's been said a couple of times here this morning, I think Deb just mentioned it in her remarks, how in New England we're a close network, and you know, in my time working with state agencies and utilities across New England and the Northeast, really, the issues that you all are facing are not much different. Some of the, state-specific regulatory challenges may vary here and there, but, all in all, the issues are largely the same. So NACWA, I don't know what that was. I didn't do it. Okay, oh good, it's still up. Perfect landing. NACWA represents public wastewater and stormwater agencies of all sizes across the country, and we have a growing network of advocacy and strength and voice for all of these utilities. And really the vision of this national association is to represent every utility as a NACWA member and to help build a strong and sustainable clean water future. And in my role as a policy advisor and lobbyist and consultant based in Massachusetts, I'm happy to be able to partner with them to help deliver some of that important work across the country. One of the things that NACWA does in its work, which is so important, is to make sure that when members of Congress, for example, and other policy and decision makers are thinking about utilities and infrastructure, that water actually comes to mind. And not only comes to mind, but is front and center of mind. It's been decades of trying to put water on even footing with transportation, roads, bridges, electricity, gas, and we still have more work to do. And as I'm sure all of you have experienced this in your time, but the evolution in thinking when we talk about and think about utilities has really come a long way. And so we continue those efforts. There are three major themes that we think about when communicating and working for and about water utilities. And part of the evolution in thinking, in terms of who utilities are, is just embracing in concept and reality that all of you and our water utilities are no longer only about core Clean Water Act programs and responsibilities. Your work goes far beyond that. So utilities of the future are innovating. You're thinking about energy, reuse, green infrastructure, non-traditional partnerships, all while being pushed to lower costs all along the way. And I know what hard work all of that is. And so in addition to the expansiveness of the work and recognizing the importance of the work, the need for infrastructure funding continues to be critical. And at the same time, we also are very thoughtful and focused about affordability and the acknowledgement that costs are not nominal for anyone, but that there are disproportionate burdens on some members of our population and environmental justice communities in particular. So looking at all of these things on a national scale, on a regional scale, and on a state and local scale, I know continues to be a priority. So you read the newspaper, right? And in the last couple of weeks, I think as we've looked at what's happening in DC and thinking about our federal budgetary process, it's not been smooth sailing, to say the least. And so advocacy has continued to be incredibly important right now. Congress has enacted a continuing resolution, and we're looking at funding levels, particularly for the state revolving fund, right? So we all lived through everything that was happening with the bipartisan infrastructure law, or IIJA, and how we saw some of those monies move from federal agencies, EPA, Department of Energy, to states and then to municipalities. And it took my experience in Massachusetts was it took a really long time. There wasn't a lot of guidance. It was unclear sort of what money was going to be used for where, and I know that's a challenge. Our core state revolving fund programs have been dropping over years. So if we look at, and I was really interested in hearing from colleagues at Connecticut Deep talking about the Clean Water Fund and how much the state puts into that program, and the fact that so much of that funding is grants. I think that's fantastic. Massachusetts doesn't quite do it the same way, and I think there are some challenges there, that it's primarily loans in Massachusetts with some opportunities for principal forgiveness, but Connecticut really has, and that works for them. Connecticut has a really stellar program. When we look at the federal side of things, we see a pretty steady decline in what's coming in from the federal programs. So just to give you a flavor, in 2018, the federal appropriation for SRF for Connecticut was in the magnitude of about $19.6 million. More recently, 2023, the appropriation was 9.8, so basically cut in half, and we're seeing a similar dynamic for New England as a whole, right? So for all of the New England states combined, 2018 was over 122 million, and more recently, 2023 appropriation for all of New England combined was closer to 57 million. So big drops, while we remember that we're utilities of the future, we're doing more. We know these challenges are there, and I think that's why our advocacy and our outreach continue to be so important. One of the things that I think sometimes when you're doing your day job, right, you're focused on operating your facilities, meeting your requirements, keeping everybody up and running is sort of like, what's the message? And so I think if I were to boil it down, and NACWA colleagues would boil it down, obviously funding the Clean Water SRF is critical. Constantly reminding people that these are 24 hours a day, 7-day a week services that are essential not only to protecting the environment, but public health. That SRF tends to be the primary funding tool, and that, as we've just discussed, funding has been declining for the last several years. And really that the consequences, among other things, without having that additional influx of federal funds is increased rates, particularly impacting those who cannot afford it. So NACWA has hired me and my firm to help enhance some of their partnerships in New England. And why they're focused on New England is a couple of reasons. One, EPA Region 1, our federal colleagues at EPA Region 1 tend to be more proactive, more out in front, maybe more aggressive, for lack of a better word, in terms of their expectations, requirements of states and of utilities. And that action and that work tends to find its way to other EPA regions across the country. So really having a good understanding of what's happening here and what regulatory decisions are being made here is often a litmus test for what we might see in other parts of the country. You may not know this, or maybe you do, that there are 3 remaining states in the United States that are unauthorized to implement the NPDES program. 2 of them are in New England, Massachusetts and New Hampshire. Sidebar, in my time working for Governor Baker, I tried twice to work with colleagues to get legislation passed so that Massachusetts would be authorized to take over that program, and I don't want to say failed miserably, but it was pretty bad, in terms of the amount of support that we were able to get in Massachusetts for taking that program over. So in light of the fact that EPA, our Region 1 colleagues, are writing permits for 2 of the 6 New England states, they have a big influence in terms of what's happening in New England, and I think you may see sometimes ideas that they have for appropriate approaches in Mass and New Hampshire may find its way, sort of pressuring other state agencies for approaches that they might take. We have 23 members, NACWA members here in New England, in all of the New England states, and a good handful of folks here in Connecticut that are members of NACWA. And we have some key issues that I think we're all dealing with that I'd like to talk a little bit about, right? We have wet weather CSO challenges. We still have some of these older communities, right, that have combined systems. There's been a heavy focus in New England on stormwater and use of the residual designation authority provisions under the Clean Water Act regulations. And as folks have been talking about over and over and over again, and rightfully so, we have PFAS, and we have PFAS impacting our drinking water programs, our wastewater programs, our biosolids programs, and it's a public health concern and an environmental concern that we're all dealing with together. So we have opportunities for multi-state coordination and influence, and to really get our hands in some of the potentially precedent-setting decisions that are happening here in New England. So I just wanted to talk a little bit about how we message some of the key things that we are working on here in Connecticut and in New England writ large. I'm not a communications expert. Some of you may be, or you may have staff that are really keen on crisp communication and advocacy. And so while I'm not an expert, I have worked in government for a very long time and have learned from positive experiences, from the mistakes that I have made or colleagues have made, learning the hard way, and learning what works from watching others. And so, a couple of things I would just say as we're thinking about this together is, outreach to decision makers, policymakers, state legislators is really critical. We heard this morning from Melissa was talking about who legislators are, right? And they have a lot on their plate and, lots of things going on. It's so true, and wastewater and sort of the intricacies of the work that you do are not, there's a lot of acronyms, like it's a lot of technical information. It doesn't always stick. You have to hear it a few times. And so I think that's a really important thing to think about. The other thing I would say is that, and I'm finding this with some of my clients in Massachusetts, is that so often wastewater work in particular, but drinking water too, there's often an economic development component to whatever it is that you're doing. And the pipes and pumps and all of that may not sink in when you're talking to some folks, but wanting to put that affordable housing facility, building, complex in your town sure will. And if you don't have the infrastructure to support that, for example, or to support that new industry or whatever the case may be, that will hit home. And I think trying to find those connections and those stories is very important. I've also learned, along the way, some, maybe they feel obvious things, but don't meet for the first time in an emergency. If you have a water main break or something really terrible that's happening, you don't want to be introducing yourself to your state legislator right then. Hopefully you have, or your local officials, and I know that's not true for your local officials or state officials. You want to be having these relationships as you go. I was at a Massachusetts-based symposium a couple of weeks ago, and I gave the example of, folks will remember the Merrimack Valley gas explosion and what a tragedy that was. And one thing I will say that I learned and, really appreciated in that circumstances is that when the governor showed up, lieutenant governor showed up, and the team showed up, everybody already knew each other in that community, right? So you could roll up your sleeves and get to work without figuring out who's who and who does what. And I think, that's a very extreme example, but it's a good one of why that's so important. I also think it's kind of nice to not meet for the first time when you're asking for money. It'd be good if folks had a good sense of who you are and the important work that you do before, you hit them up for whatever it is that you need. And I think it's all goes along the same lines of this relationship building. And then, of course, being transparent, not exaggerating and not sugarcoating the reality, I think is a key thing that we all try to focus on. So when we think about some of our, and I'm just being mindful of the time too, thinking about some of our challenges, PFAS, we've talked a lot about it today. I know it's on everyone's mind. And honestly, in some of the conversations I'm having with clients and with other utilities that we're working with, there's definitely fatigue going on, even though we haven't come anywhere near to figuring out how to solve these challenges. And I think it is because it's so pervasive in all of the work that we're doing. It touches so many different media, and there's not a clear path forward, right? So we're hearing what's happening on the federal level and the state level and on the local level, and you're getting pushed and pulled in a lot of different directions. I will say that one thing that we have been tracking, and the NACWA DC team has been tracking very closely, is what's happening with EPA's PFAS regulatory agenda. So while the agency is continuing to think about its approach with regards to biosolids and wastewater assessments, there's also a lot happening under CERCLA, the Haz Waste and Superfund laws, CERCLA and RCRA, looking at liability, and so there's a lot happening nationally there, sort of who's responsible for the disposal and the releases, and so depending on the direction that EPA goes, it has the potential to really impact some of the work that you do. So what we've been looking at and what we've been seeking nationally as a sector is from Congress, hoping for a clear statutory exemption adoption of a polluter pays model for PFAS cleanups, and from EPA really just looking for clarity in scope of existing exclusions, for example, normal application of fertilizers and federally permitted releases. So these are things that we continue to track and advocate that will matter to utilities across New England and across the country. I know some states, and I know Connecticut among them, Massachusetts the same, is working on, having task forces and action plans. And I know in Connecticut, there's a task force that DEEP and DPH have been co-chairing together that's, bringing agencies and interested entities together. We had a similar task force in Massachusetts last year that I had the opportunity to sit on. It was a legislative task force that was really focused on getting PFAS out of the waste stream, looking at, I heard the question earlier about firefighters and firefighting foam and sort of how we address that and other sources of PFAS. And I think part of these efforts are important, but it just adds to the complexity, right? Because we're gonna have, sort of this federal approach, we're gonna have state approaches, and then we're gonna have what all of you are dealing with on the day-to-day with the water and wastewater side of things. I think, when we think about communication too, and this was really a prominent conversation in Massachusetts, is really understanding, making sure people understand that you all didn't, you're not the generators, you're not the source of the PFAS, right? It's coming from upstream, and so you're gonna need help at the end of the pipe dealing with mitigation and cleanup and, wanting to hold those who put it in the system in the first place responsible for it being there. So lots of things for us to continue to work on together. Another key issue, I'll give you a PFAS break for the rest of the few minutes that I'll be speaking this morning. Looking at wet weather and combined sewer overflows, I think here when we think about the work that you're doing, and a lot of our New England utilities have come so far in terms of CSO mitigation and abatement. I spent a number of years working at the Massachusetts Water Resources Authority, which was the big Boston Harbor case that's focused on CSO in that system and its member communities. I think they're down to about 10 outfalls left, but of course it's the hardest 10, don't quote me on the number, it's somewhere between 10 and 15. It's the hardest ones left. And what we've experienced in Massachusetts, and I suspect is probably true in Connecticut too, is that passage of right to know or CSO notification laws, while perhaps very helpful from an outreach perspective. I think much of the public is realizing that this happens, doesn't understand that CSOs were engineered the way they are to help prevent backups in your basement and to deal with big increases in storm and rainwater. And so now that they know that it still happens at all, they don't want it to happen at all, right? So we're missing the part that we used to have lots and many CSO overflow discharges, and we're down so many from where we were, but now there's sort of no tolerance for any of that kind of overflow. So it's a hard, they're expensive to deal with, and it's a hard communications conundrum to have. On the legal end, there's been a lot of focus in CSO long-term control plans or consent decrees across the country about language related to cause and contribute, what discharge causes and contributes to pollution and water quality impairments. And so there's quite a bit of happening on the federal level. For example, in San Francisco, there is was an appeal in the Ninth Circuit about this cause and contribute language. In particular, a couple of other municipalities or utilities across the country, Buffalo, New York, Springfield, Mass, I'm missing New York City and a couple of others, filed amicus in that case. The Ninth Circuit has just denied that en banc review, which is too bad because that cause and contribute language remains a real issue. I think folks are regrouping to see if there's interest or stamina for a petition for Supreme Court, U.S. Supreme Court review on that one. So that's an issue that we'll continue to pay attention to. But I know CSOs and wet weather are issues that are prominent here as well as other parts of the country. And so, you know, you're not expected to control the rain, but yet some are being asked that. You know, when we think about climate and challenges associated with climate, one thing I did want to sort of share with you, I don't think in some of the research and conversations I've had that this is happening in Connecticut, but it is happening in Massachusetts, and the permits that EPA issues is that there are new requirements being proposed in EPA permits about stormwater and wet weather and climate resiliency planning. And requirements in proposed NPDES permit for decade-long stormwater plans that go beyond, obviously, the useful life of a facility. They're pretty extensive and prescriptive, and there's expectations that developed plans will be established within a year of permit issuance. So this is a little game of ping pong that we're doing in Massachusetts right now, where a lot of folks have commented on a bunch of permits that have come out and sort of waiting for EPA response. And so I think a couple of things about that. One, it's a big burden. The potential of this work is potentially quite burdensome for utilities, but I also think, in my mind, that type of requirement goes beyond the context of what is a discharge of a pollutant in a NPDES type permit. It really stretches, I think, the authority for under the NPDES program for that type of work. So I say it only just to give you a heads up of what's happening to in one of your neighboring states. I don't get the sense yet that EPA, either Region 1 or sort of across the country, is pressuring already authorized states to go down this path, but you never know, and we're sort of keeping an eye on what's happening. There have been a number of permits in the Connecticut River watershed area in Massachusetts, as well as MWRA's Deer Island permit that are seeing these proposed requirements. So more to come on that. If I were to say, you know, sort of anything about climate, in terms of your messaging and communications, I would say you all as utilities are doing a lot of work on the climate mitigation front, and so I think, you know, you have to do so much to keep your facilities resilient, but I also know that Connecticut utilities are looking at wind and solar and EV, and so you are part of the solution, and I think people may not always know that, and so it's important for you to talk about that good, important work that you're doing, because I know it's happening. So it does feel like perhaps more challenge than opportunity, but every challenge maybe brings an opportunity in terms of the relationships that you have and the work that you all are doing. I'm thrilled to have a chance now that I'm in private sector life. I was sharing with folks at the table that this is the first time I've worked in the private sector. I've been in government my entire career. It's weird being on this side, but I'm happy to have found a way to continue to work on water and wastewater utility and infrastructure challenges, and look forward to partnering with all of you. I think we'll have some opportunities through the good work of Nuia and Mary Mary Berry and her team do such great work in New England. We partner and we'll work closely with NUIPIC, New England Interstate Water Pollution Control Commission, a place that I worked in. There are some colleagues here today. So we have lots of room for partnership and collaboration here in New England, and I look forward to being part of it with all of you. So thanks for the time. It's nice to be here. Thanks.